Hey guys, Shane here and welcome to the People First podcast. And today I've got a very special friend of mine and I'm very excited to get into this episode. Meet Kas.
Hey.
Kas is someone who I've known for, how long have we known each other for now, Kas?
Must be about 4 years, maybe.
Yeah, I would say I'd say at least 4 because I met you through personal training, through like the gym.
Well, my son came here first.
Well, yeah, that's right. So obviously I met Tice. He was the first to show up. And then it would be weird if he showed up on his own. And then I started chatting and got into sort of, what did you want to do more of like health, fitness? What sort of drew you to start training here?
I think I looked at the environment when I was watching Tice work out. And I knew Leah very well. I grew up with Leah. And she always talked fabulously about this place. So I think what I hated about the gym was that everyone sort of ignores each other and earphones in and
General gyms, not this one.
Yeah. And so then when I came here and saw how much everyone like cheers each other on and helps each other out, I was like, that is a vibe.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's kind of, I mean, and I know people are probably listening like, of course they say that, they're members. I'm like, but like when 100 people say that, it's got to be some truth about it, right?
Yeah.
Now, I have known Kas, like we said, for 4 years. And during that time, we've had conversations. We've chatted. I've shared parts of my journey with Kas. Kas has shared parts of her journey with me. And I thought, what better person than Kas to have on our podcast? Has a story to share, has an amazing job, has a beautiful family, and so much to give to you guys listening. So I wanted to bring her on. Now, rather than me introduce you like that, Kas, I want you to introduce yourself. How do you feel the people would best learn about you in a 30 to 60 second brief?
Oh, that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, well, you could take as long as you want. There's no penalties for going over.
I think I have a very unique story, which then drove me to want to make it better for other people.
Yep.
I'm always trying to be pretty positive and hopeful. I really struggle with the concept of people only being their story. Like, I think you got to be more than that.
Yep.
So, yeah, but I'm a passionate worker, passionate mum.
Mum, how many kids do you have?
3 boys.
3 boys and 1 husband, right?
Yes. So 4 boys.
How old are your boys?
10, 12 and 15.
And you know I know this stuff, but at the same time, it's good to
to
reshare.
Absolutely.
And so, Kas, what I like to start with, and I like to get into these podcasts pretty quickly and just get started on, a couple of topics, and we'll go from there. Where do you think, out of all the places that you've had challenges along the lines, where do you think your biggest challenges sort of stemmed from? And while we're there, maybe run us back through where you grew up, what drew you to where you are right now? How do we get to this point?
Yeah, predominantly grew up in Mount Druitt. Moved there when I was about 5 or 6. Have always floated around that area. Moved out towards Penrith once, maybe about 9 years ago. What else? I think I was a bit of a naughty teenager, as we all were.
Yeah.
So a few different high schools, things like that. Dropped out early, didn't really focus on achieving much initially. But then...
Did you go to school locally?
Yeah, so I went to Wayland.
Yep.
And then I went to Dunheved after that. So
good schools?
well,
You're like, yeah, I felt they were good.
they were
Maybe at the time.
schools.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I think if you ask a child if it's a good school, it's not the best person to be. Like every school, like we went to South Strathfield, went to Gladesville Public, went to Malvina, then turned to Ryde Secondary College, went to a few different TAFEs. And I've definitely had a little bit of an assortment of education. And I can't fault them based on their ability to serve the child, but I just never enjoyed the environments. Like it didn't make me happy. Like nothing
neither.
about those spaces I could tell you that, it's an amazing place to go. The schools and the teachers were fine. Nothing wrong with them.
Yeah.
But I didn't love any second of it.
Yeah,
Like, it
me
wasn't
too.
enjoyable.
I didn't spend a lot of time in class, so
I spent daydreaming, and then when I figured out, like, I don't know if it's a cool term anymore, but wagging was a thing you could do. I'm like, you can leave and no one actually, you don't get that much trouble
yeah,
unless you get caught. I'm going to try and push the boundary.
me too. Yeah.
So you grew up in Mount Druitt most of the time, then went to schools in the area.
Yeah. I had a brief period where I went to high school in Melbourne when I was about 15, but then I came back, went back to Dunhevet again, and then decided that I would leave school probably about 15. So I hadn't even finished year 10.
Yep.
Dropped out. Home was a bit tricky, so I think I just decided to stay home instead. And then I didn't think about really studying or do anything until I'd had TICE. That's when I started.
How old were you when you had TICE?
I was about 23.
Okay, yep. So from 15 to 23, you kind of just like cruised through a little and just sort of did what you felt. Did you have any aspirations when you because I know that when I left school, but I was like, I'd done my HSC. The reason being was simply because I couldn't think anything worse than working full time. Yeah. So I thought, well, this is easier. No one has any expectations of you if you're at school and there's no real risk to do anything.
Yeah.
But from there, my aspirations went from that was all over the shop, from being a lifeguard to, which didn't work out because I wasn't fit enough at the time, but then all the way to personal training and then, plumbing and all sorts of trades. Where was your head when you were 15?
Sunbake in the backyard.
Yes. Yeah, mine was there too. Yeah, it's summer. I always lost my jobs when I had jobs conveniently around summertime, so I could spend the next 3 or 4 months just cruising back in the sun.
Yeah, I think there was lots of partying and laying around. And then once I turned about 18, I think that's when I started to work. I did hospitality from 18 all the way through to when I graduated uni. So I was a bar worker that whole time, all the way through my pregnancies. I enjoyed being around people all the time. And I got really good at listening to stories, which I think then prompted me to follow up maybe, I could be a counsellor, I could do something similar like that. So,
which for the people listening, I think we've gone over. What do you do for work exactly?
I'm a caseworker, so I work with children and young people in care and before care.
And how long have you done that for?
7 years.
And let's go back to where we were, and let's go all the way back to sort of growing up. How would you describe for the people listening, like how your sort of life was and what you remember, the earliest years that you remember, and did that draw you towards where you're working now, do you think, ultimately? And is there a connection that you've drawn from that?
Yep. So I was in care as a child, and I think I don't really remember having a caseworker. I worked through like a couple of different offices. I was actually removed in Canberra, so I think initially they had to transfer case management to Mount Druitt, and then I don't really remember much else. But I always knew that I'd been in care. I didn't remember a lot, and my family would tell me that was probably my brain's way of protecting itself.
Yep.
Then I think the older I got, I started to really want to learn more about that identity of me and what had happened. And so I'd start asking more questions, but lots of people don't have a lot of answers for you, or they remember the story the way that they perceive it. Yeah. So it was really tricky. So then, once I started studying, I think that then became my focus, that I was going to be a caseworker and I was going to give kids an experience I didn't have. And it worked.
Yeah, and so the experience for a lot of people in care, what it would seem from the outside looking in, is that it's just extremely traumatic. Like from the moment obviously you're coming from a traumatic-based environment to begin with, right? So you're coming into care because the environment that you're living in is less than optimal.
Yeah, however, it's deemed unsafe.
Unsafe. Yeah. And so therefore, though, from my perspective, being taken into care, and from the world that we see from the people looking in, is that it can also be quite unsafe.
Yeah.
Where do you go with that? Like, do you see what I'm talking about with that? Like, does that make sense? Because for
the risk doesn't change just because kids enter care, and I think the really deep feelings and all of those things are still happening. There can be lots of disruption where kids are moving around. I moved around a few times, even within family placements, because people realised that they couldn't continue caring for me or things like that. And just definitely the identity stuff. Like, people make you feel like you belong, but you don't feel like you belong. So I think I rebelled against that a lot as an adolescent. And it wasn't that people were telling me that I didn't belong in that family and they were relatives of mine. I felt different.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I know. And I have no relation to, I wasn't taken out of my home. I left home. And then I was lucky enough to find a family who were kind enough to let me live there for the next 5 or 6 years. And even like they are amazing and I love them to bits, and they made me feel so included. But I get exactly what you're saying. Like, you know, you still feel a little different. Like, and that's not anything to do with the people.
No.
It's purely to do because I'm like, I just don't like, you know, when I noticed it the most was, say, they would bring up like baby photos of like Tom and Mel together. And I'm like, oh, I'm never going to be in those.
Yeah.
And I really want to be. Like, I really want to be in those photos. I really want to be, and, you know, a brother and like a legitimate born into the family brother and sister, because that family really saved me from having to go through a lot of trauma. But I totally resonate when you say, like, it's not that through the fault of the people that were looking after you that you didn't feel like you belonged. It's just this piece of you, like, hold on, this is not where it started.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I would get nervous to talk about my other family. Like, not everyone else never made me feel that I couldn't, but it was like you didn't want people to think that you weren't fitting in, or that, I don't know. So I often was really scared to mention my real mum or my siblings that weren't there. So it was definitely hard.
I want to ask you a question, and because I know how I felt, and I was much older, right? So how old were you again when you were taken into care?
I think about 4 or 5.
5. I was 15, not when taking care, left, right? So let's, everyone listening,
Yeah.
not comparing my situation, just I'm trying to, you know, give my own understanding as well so that we can all connect on it. But when was the first time you remember like being out of where you were and being in a new state or environment for you that was what I actually consider it to be safe, right?
Yeah.
The first day that I left home, so I remember packing my bag, having an argument with my mum at the time, her telling me never to come back, and me saying, well, I don't plan to. Bit of an argument, a bit of an aggressive situation. Left. That was an extremely highly fueled emotional situation where I left and went into the home that I was staying with, which is with Lynn and Russell. I remember going to sleep that night feeling uneasy that there was silence.
Yeah.
So uneasy. I'm like, why is it quiet? Why is no one yelling at anybody? I was like, this is weird. And then I remember waking up that next morning to literally, this sounds so like out of a movie, to the sounds of birds and the sun coming through the blinds on my face.
Of course.
I was like,
this is how the other people live.
I was like, what is this? Rather than waking up where, you know, into some sort of loud argument of some kind or whatever, or just nothing. That was when I first went, wow, like where is it from? Like, what's the other side? Like, what do you mean people don't yell at each other 24/7?
Yeah.
Do you remember the time when you started to feel that, okay, this is where I'm at, this is what's happening?
I don't know that I have that, but I do sort of remember going through and my mum, that I would refer to as my mum, is my foster mum.
Yep.
Which makes it easier than me having to
always say my foster mum. Yeah.
Yeah. If anything, I would say birth mum for the other one.
Yep.
Like I remember chucking a big tantrum. I think we were doing like a garage sale, and I'd put items outside, and then I wanted my stuff back. Like I was trying to buy it back, and she was like, "No, remember we've talked about this. It's going to go out." And I got really mad, and I was screaming, and I told her I hated her, and then freaking out about, what's her reaction going to be?
Yeah.
And she sung the worm song to me. Nobody loves me. Everybody hates me. Guess I'll go eat worms. And I'm like, what? Like, you're going to joke about this? Like,
yeah.
And that's still such a fond memory that she could just manage my big behaviour in such a positive way, which stopped me in my tracks because whoa, that's not what I'm used to.
Rather be met with the same level of anger and like frustration from a fully grown adult.
Yeah.
Which, you know, that's what I find a lot of parents, and I've been guilty of it, I'm sure, is trying to match my 5-year-old or 4-year-old's energy with the same energy they're giving me, which gets us nowhere, as opposed to changing the dynamic of the situation.
Well, let's yell at someone to tell them not to yell. It just seems like a weird concept, but obviously that what was happening in my other home, and there was like physical abuse and like lots of different unsafe situations when I was little. And even my siblings I was raised with in that home, they often talk about these stories of me when I came to live with them, that I would swear like a sailor and that I would break things. And, you know, I think I read a file note that said that I had tied up my sister Alison, who's 3 years older than me, and basically told her that's what you get when you're fucking naughty.
Well,
I've got no memory of any of this, and then sent lots of apology messages once I read those notes. But they said that they would often be looking at their mum like, oh my God, like, is she not in trouble? And apparently she would say, well, she just needs she needs love. Like, she doesn't know any better. She needs love. And it worked because I didn't continue to behave that way or talk that way. So
Now, I could be wrong, but my personal belief is there are two quick ways to reset individuals, right? One is through pain and anger and fear. The other is through love and acceptance. You know,
Yep.
they're the two extremes of the whatever you would call it, the emotional spectrum, whatever it might be.
yeah.
And how quickly did you feel that you adapted to that? Because it can be very unusual to have, like, if you don't have any baseline for love, like, you know, that you do, because I always go, people go, did you love your mum? Yes, I love my mum. Like, I absolutely loved her because that was what I grew up in. Like, I loved her. Like,
Yeah.
like that was still love, but my baseline's changed.
Yeah.
So from when I was a child, now I know that wasn't it. Like, going back, if I was to get my body and put it back into me being a child, would I think that there's love there? Maybe, but there was no baseline. Do you know what I mean? Do you remember when the moment started to go, oh, I'm actually learning how to love, learning how to be loved?
Not necessarily, but I think what was lucky for me is I had lots of really great family around me even before that. My mum was really transient, so like my birth mum, and she would bounce around in different households, or she would just leave me with people, which included the people that ended up at my long-term placement. So they had all cared for me unofficially numerous times before that. And so I think as much as the world had taught me that things were not safe, I think then they'd provided me opportunity to be loved and treated nicely in between. So, yeah.
Yeah, because I always thought that. I thought, like, you know, where's the baseline? When do we reframe the baseline? And then I do you ever hold yourself now as an adult thinking, you know, am I getting it right? Like, am I doing what was done to me as a kid? Like,
Absolutely.
And obviously we're not, right? Like, but I still stress out, like, and this frustrates me a little bit, because sometimes if I raise my voice, right, because sometimes I'm not screaming at someone. If I raise my voice to Chloe, I'm trying to get a point across or whatever, I'm not yelling at Chloe, but I might be like, no, what I mean is, and my voice gets higher, right?
Yeah.
I know in me I'm having a response automatically.
Yep.
Even me doing that, and it's me doing it, I'm having an internal response to the situation that's occurring.
Yeah.
And then I'll see my little girl, and she will then try and stop us from talking. So dance, jump in the way, like, hey, Dad, look at me, or whatever, and like just really trying to distract me from having that conversation that's louder than usual. Like, it's not abusive. It's just louder than usual, and she starts to know. And I think, even though it's not as extreme as when I was a child, am I still doing the same things? And do you ever get that for yourself?
Always. I think even as soon as my children were born, or even being pregnant with my first, this real fear around, will I be a good mum?
Yeah.
My mum, like my foster mum, she had died when I was in grade 3. So I thought by the time I was 21 having my first child, did I really remember what it was like to have a mum?
Yeah.
Because my birth mum had been in and out of my life maybe 5 or 6 times by then, but each time was pretty traumatic. And she never lived in the same state as me, so we'd have little opportunities to see each other and then go. And I was so frightened that I'd get it wrong and that it would be another generation in my family experiencing this. So I think when I was studying, like, I learnt, I think maybe Keone was like 4, and in one of my initial classes they were like, oh, we build children's coping mechanisms up to the age of 7. And I was like, oh my God, he's 4. I'm halfway through. Like, you know, am I doing okay? Is he going to be okay? Have I stuffed it up already?
Yeah.
So I was always really passionate about taking the things that I was learning home, and then even talking to Jamie about it and being like, hey, you know, we're going to teach our boys that they're allowed to cry, because, you know, pressure cooker effect, and we don't want them to just feel depressed and not talk about things. And he always took it on board, which was fab. So
I think it's important to have someone on the same page as you when you're raising kids. Chloe and I try and do the best we can to be on the same page. We're both raised in very different households, so it can be very, very challenging to go, do you understand where we're coming from? And what do you do when when you do feel like that? What is it that you're doing and saying to yourself to stop you? Because that's a thought, not a reality. What is it that you're doing to yourself? Is there something, what gives you satisfaction and understanding that you're not doing what you think that you're doing?
I think even the ability to reflect on it, or apologise, is massive, because my experience of trying to have even really calm conversations with my birth mum throughout the years to get closure around experiences, she would just shut it down. There was no talking about it. And there was definitely never an apology or an attempt to repair after a blow up, and which is a term I've obviously learnt later in life. But I know that any time that I had a heated moment with my kids where I got cranky, and it might have been because of work or whatever else, the ability to go in and sit with them and say, it wasn't okay that I got upset like that. Can we talk about what happened? Which was both around, mummy was tired and that doesn't make it okay. But, when she asked 72 times for you to do that thing, it pushed her over the edge.
This is what happens sometimes, but this is what I'm apologising for as well.
Yeah, which is a concept that obviously I never had. So I think so far it's worked really well. I've got pretty well-rounded boys. So
yeah, and I can fault nothing about your whole family. So I've never seen one moment of anything where I've gone, that was interesting.
Yeah.
One of the things that I was thinking about when I was talking to you about sort of like doing the podcast and going from here is the perceived stories that those around us have about our experience.
Yeah.
So my relation to this, and I'll try and lead with it, is that I have an understanding of my story about how it went, like my experience and my emotion through every event that I lived through.
Yeah.
Whether it be the exposure to, hard drug use, or, domestic violence, or being exposed to, physical violence, and I don't see it as a bad thing. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I know that can be, people go, what do you mean? Of course it's bad. Yeah. Well, yes, but again, the baseline for me was set in a different place when I was a child compared to those who were talking to me. It was a different place. And I like to think of it all as a bit of a gift. But what I was wanting to know with you is that your story is your story. Where do you think others fall into that? Do they think that it's a complete fallacy and everything you're saying is a complete lie? And, where do you think that stems from for them? Is it just them to block it out because they can't deal with some of the emotional trauma that they would have created? What's your view on all that? Because I know mine is that it's frustrating that I have my story and it's sort of made me to feel like, am I a liar? Yeah. Like, do you think, am I actually lying? Because now I not only feel like all of the stuff that happened, now I feel like sometimes that person makes me feel like I'm an absolute liar.
Yeah. Most of my story I'd heard little bits and pieces from grandparents or my other parents, or people close to the family would tell me stories about, when you first came to live here, this is what was happening, or like they'd named the fact that I'd been physically abused because they'd say, we won't smack you because you're already hurt and things like that. But other than that, there wasn't a lot of conversation about my real mum, other than telling me that she struggled with the truth. So I think I then was always really mindful about telling the truth, even as a kid. Then when I first spoke to her on the phone, I didn't talk to her from, 5 or 6 years old up until maybe 15. There was no contact. And one of the first times I did get her on the phone, I felt really brave and I asked, can you tell me about what's happened? And she shut it down immediately.
Yeah. We're
not talking about it. Everything you've heard is a lie. She then went on to sort of blame other people in my family about the things that had happened. You've been fed all these, absolute distruths. And so there was nothing I could do about it because I was like, this was my shot. And she shut it down. So that's it. Yeah. And so you then did second guess it. And throughout the years of having little bits of contact, I would hear her version of those stories, which sometimes would change. But then I applied to read my files once I started working in this industry because I actually didn't know I could read my files. And then it was very black and white then around, these were interview notes with, 5-year-old me very clearly describing what had happened. And it was like, well, I don't think now all of that stuff can be discounted.
Yeah, and now there's the black and white truth. And you were so gracious enough to give me your notes on, to have a little read over and just so we could get some topical information to chat about. Yeah. And it actually reminded me of a time that I was given, or I found in my own file system, at home. And it had, and I didn't share this with you until I think now, so this is the first time you're hearing it. But I had a note in there and it says that I had this scar on my arm that's the size of my shoulder and it's a burn. So it's a burn mark I have no idea how it's gotten there. So I'm a 36-year-old almost in July adult who still has no idea how a giant burn ended up on my arm. And so there's two stories behind that. The first story is my mum's story. The second story is really kind of my dad's story at the time, was that it was my mum burnt me with an iron on purpose.
Oh.
I find it hard to believe, right? I don't think I just want to believe that. And even if it did, I wouldn't want to believe it. So in my notes, it says, Westmead Children's Hospital, we've assessed Shane for these burns on his arm. There's no way for us to know specifically how these burns occurred, but they don't look like they were intentional. that's not for us to say that you probably shouldn't investigate or follow up on some of this stuff, right? It's a very, very like vague doctor's report. Doctors want to get involved, whatever.
Yeah.
I don't believe that my mum burnt me, but it's in my mind. I'm like, there's no end to it. There's no truth, because her story is that I was a baby and she'd made me a bottle, so a baby bottle, and heat up in the microwave, and I think it was like a glass bottle or something like that back in the 90s. And it had rolled from the bed onto my arm. I didn't cry apparently and didn't scream too much about it, which I find a weird part of the story. But then later on, Mum was undressing me to take off my baby clothes. I think it was about 1 or something, 2. And then this pussy, wet sleeve was there, and it was the burn from that. So it was like pussed and stuff. But I was like, that's so strange. So nothing lines up. And I think when you read back to that, you think, where was I? Like what was my space like? I just wish you could just at some point go back into that, like just pick a day and you could just watch for 24 hours, just as like a TV show, and just say, absolutely. I know exactly now where a lot of the things I'm dealing with now as an adult, and where I can sort of cross those lines and dot those T's. So
I read in mine that apparently I was having seizures as a baby, and that I spent like a considerable amount of time on any-seizure medication. And at the time I'd already had my 3 children. I was, 30 years old when I finally read this stuff, and I was like, well, that would have been handy to know at some point when I was younger, like, or having children. Is it something I had to be mindful of? But that's the stuff that gets lost, I guess, because I had moved around, and at that point I was still in my mum's care. So,
And it's like when it's funny that you brought up when you were pregnant, Chloe, we would go to our midwife appointments and doctor's appointments there. So your family history, Shane, can you tell me about, what runs in the family? I'm like, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Like I've never spoken to my family about, is there heart disease, diabetes, is there seizures, is there anything? And then my dad unfortunately passed away. I didn't really get a good chance to chat to him about his side of the family life, and never had that connection too much on, like deep, dark stuff about the family's medical history. You think this would be really good to be able to go back for a couple of nights and just watch some stuff happen, have some conversations, and get some closure in some of these areas. But yeah, I was actually meaning to bring that up to you before we started that, it's funny that we have that note there, and I'm like, oh wow, like it's so surreal as an adult to read that. You think, is this a story? But it's not. It's like real. It's like an actual documented thing that happened to you as a child. I have a giant scar on my arm to prove the fact that the story is real. But I don't know how it happened. I still have no idea why I have a giant scar on my arm that everyone goes, what's your scar from? And I've got a tattoo over it, not to cover it up, because it doesn't embarrass me. It doesn't make me feel self-conscious. But it's like, every time I took my shirt off, someone would go, what's that giant scar from? And I go, I don't know. Like, I don't know how to tell you. Like, I don't know where that's come from. I've got 2 sides to a story. One when, there was the burn, like purposeful, and one was a baby bottle burn. Like, I take the pick, whichever one you want to run with, because I don't know.
See, for me, it was like my name was almost as obvious as your scar. So my name is Kasali, and that name stood out a lot. And being raised out of a home that was your own, I didn't know who my birth father was until a few years ago, but he didn't know he was my father either, so that wouldn't have provided any context. But often it was like all the way through high school and stuff too, people were like, oh, Kasali, what a beautiful name. What nationality are you? Where does it come from? All those things. And I'd be like standing there awkwardly going, actually I don't know what nationality I am, and I don't know where my name came from. So yeah, great questions.
Did you ever come up with a cool story for that? Because sometimes when I was a kid, like young in private school, I'd say I got shot by, I got shot or I got stabbed, or I got like, because it looks like an actual stab wound. And I'm like, I could trick anyone.
Yeah.
You have your own
no cool story. It was just awkward then. It was like the crickets chirping because...
Actually, hold on. Do we have crickets here? This one?
Oh, wrong one.
There it is.
Yeah. Because then I'm like, good question. I actually don't know.
Now, that was something that I wanted to bring up. Go away. This thing's taking... Turn off. There we go. To bring up, just to say, like, do we find then as adults that sometimes when we... Like, where do we... So... I'm talking 1,000 miles an hour. Here's what I'm going to try and narrow it down for you so you can understand me, is that I feel like there was a full stop in my life at 15.
Yep.
And my life started at 15. Do you have a moment for yourself where you're like, okay, like, not that I want to forget it all, not that I'm going to forget it all, or not that it's going to go away, but I feel like I was born at 15.
Yeah.
Do you have something like that for yourself, or is...
I don't know. I think as I've become an adult, I've probably appreciated my life more and it's calmed down. I think even though I ended up in home, like a home where I was loved and things were calm, I experienced lots of other trauma through like death and things like that. My foster mum died when I was in year 3 at school. And then my dad had never really recovered from that. And so he just stayed home every day. He drank. He didn't like eat much. He just, I think he really struggled with losing his partner. Then he ended up really sick when I was about 15, 16. And then by the time I was 17, he had passed away as well. And then a few years later, my grandfather passed away. And so I think every time I felt like I was settling and things were okay, there were these really crucial experiences that then brought up all the unresolved trauma that you kind of just can't push down. Like, I'm going to be okay. And especially because I hate to make a big deal of it. And I'm like, what do I do? Then you'd sort of start floating along and then something else would happen to you. You're like, oh God, here we go again.
Yeah. I actually was, when I sent you the show notes and you wrote back sort of an overview, I'm like, wow, I've been lucky, touch wood, touching all the wood in my life, is that I've never really lost anybody super close to me, like obviously my dad, but we weren't close. Like, I want to know him more. I want to know more about him, and I wish I had time. But I was 4 when he left our family. Left my mum and I, sort of thing, and I never saw him really again until I saw parts of, but never had any real interaction I can remember. So I've never lost anyone super close to me like that. How did you deal with that so young? Especially someone that's so important to you, and then it's like it's just sort of kept happening to you every decade or so, right? Like you think every 5 to 10 years, I'm losing someone that I care about. Do you ever I feel like what I did in my own life was just trying to shut myself off to creating relationships with people that I would be worried about losing. But now I've got so many people in my life that I don't want to lose. So many now.
It's hard.
Like so many now. But at some point, I'm going to have to, and I'm 36 this year and never experienced it.
Wow. That's good.
Yeah,
you don't want to.
No, but I'm trying to learn. What happened for you, and where did you go with that?
My dad was actually my great uncle, so he's my grandfather's brother. So it was my dad and his wife that took me on. Then when she died a few years later, my grandfather moved in to help his brother raise me. So it was sort of me and these 2 old British men.
Yep. Sounds like a movie, though.
I got to run the house, which is a part of why I was never at school.
A baby in 3 minutes?
Yeah, a bit like that.
Yeah.
And so when Dad died, it was me and Pop left in the home because all my older siblings / foster siblings had moved out because they're considerably older than me.
Yep.
And then when I met Jamie, Pop came along. He was a package deal with me. So we even started our family and still had my Pop living with us.
Yeah, cool.
And then he passed away suddenly after an incident at home. Keone was not even 1 yet, so I was about 22. He just woke us up in the middle of the night, said he couldn't breathe. Jamie called an ambulance and it took a lifetime for them to get there. He ended up suffocating in the chair in front of us. Ambulance came in, resuscitated him, got him back, but because he'd been without oxygen so long, he ended up sustaining brain damage. So we had to turn off his life support a few days later, which was sucky because it was like reliving the trauma of the 3 days before all over again. My Pop's older brother, Graham, he lived in Sydney as well, so I had a really close relationship with him, and he ended up then moving in a few years after that, so I then had all 3 of these old Johnson men live with me.
Yeah.
I even named all 3 of my boys have their names as their middle names.
Oh, that's very special.
As I was born, I actually went to visit Gray in the city and said, guess what? Here's your new great nephew, all excited. I said, guess what his middle name is? It's Graham. And he looked at me and said, well, that must be a curse because the other 2 are dead. And I was like, that's not funny.
Wouldn't open up with that after saying that. Thanks, I might change it now. Is that okay?
Yeah. But Gray moved in with us about 2013, and then he was with us the whole time up until 2021. He died of lung cancer at home with us, so we did palliative care so that he didn't have to be alone, because COVID times, if he went to hospital, the kids would never see him again. You can't have visitors under 12, so so that's all 3 of them now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And where does that, and that's the thing about what I don't understand is where does that leave you on a day-to-day basis? They say that with grief, it's not something that we ever heal from. We just learn to live with.
Absolutely. I've cried him worse at the drop of a hat because I've looked at a turkey and he loved cooking the turkey. Like it is one of those things. And the kids talk about him so often, and that's the thing, they talk about him with such joy that you kind of have to match that. But then often I'm like running away to hide in my room and have a bit of a cry about it.
Yeah.
And we built a house, which we moved into in November last year, but we designed the house around Gray being with us. And so he had like a big bedroom at the front of the house. We made sure there was a bathroom for him because as he got older, he wouldn't be able to go up the stairs. So even that was weird to then move into this house and use that space for something that wasn't him. Yeah. And I still would rather call it Gray's room rather than my office because I don't want to replace it. Yeah.
Well, that's the stuff that's the stuff that I wanted to know. Like, because I, as I said, so fortunate enough not to have to, experience that. And I don't want to. But at some point, that's the style of life, right? The cycle of life is that, life ends for all of us. It's not permanent. And so then we have to deal with it. But to go through it so many times for yourself in such a short period of time with the connection that you have to all these people.
Yeah, I think what was hard is this year I am 37 and that's actually the age that my mum was when she died of breast cancer. And because I was, 8 years old at the time, she was an old adult. Like you don't really understand death the same. So that was probably the one that I could have ridden through without as much trauma. It was later in life, really struggling, not having a mum, that you would mourn her. But at the time I didn't understand that she was sick with breast cancer and that she would die. And I'm 37 this year and I've got kids and I can't imagine at that age having to, it's just, so I think this year hit harder on the anniversary of her death because it was like, whoa. And my older sisters talked to me about how they went through the exact same thing. Previously, whenever my boys were in year 3, I've gone through that same weird period where I'm like, well, they're my age. I can't imagine not being here for them. Like that's where I was then. So I think you link in different ways depending on where you're at.
Yeah, and as you do go through the years, right, that exposure, and then now the 37-year time frame where you're like, hold on, this is the same time that your mum passed from breast cancer. Do you find other things in your mental health, so to speak, come up? For me, I ask this because I didn't realize I had an anxiety problem for most of my life. I thought this is how you live life. This is the emotions. This is what everybody does, right? And it's only funny that because it becomes more of a thing at the moment where we're talking about a lot more, which is great because we're bringing awareness to it. But I now am aware that I have some things that I must probably deal with and are finding that they're appearing more and more in my life. So the idea that I never had not that it's a problem, but I never had a thing like I was like, I don't know what that is. Like, what do you mean? And then I went, hold on, that's me. Tick. Hold on. Everything you just said is me. And now I'm sort of going, well, where do I go to now as an adult? Like do I go back, deal with some of the traumas? Do I see somebody? Do I get professional help? What do I do to help myself with that? Not that you're going to answer my problems, but have you experienced that for yourself?
Yep, absolutely. My anxiety, I think, was something I didn't recognize as anxiety as well for quite a long time. And I think you got good at just putting on a brave face. I often, as an adolescent even, would hear other people, like other parents, say to my friends, oh, look at Cassie, she's so positive, like all these things. So then I felt like you couldn't ever talk about the bad days because people are always like, look how inspiring you are, you manage so well. And then I'm like, oh God, I have to manage. Yeah. And that has still followed me quite a lot. And that's my own expectations, which took a while to understand that other people wouldn't mind if I got sad. But definitely when I started working in this industry, I think I would be sitting there and be like, oh, I'm really noticing that I'm feeling uncomfortable. My stomach's churning, the lump in my throat, my heart's pounding, my palms are,
sweating,
tingling or sweating. And
Mum's spaghetti,
like,
bone on your chest.
Yeah. And so I did talk to my doctor and I ended up doing like a victim services referral, which I didn't know I was eligible for until I started getting this job. So I could get free trauma counselling. And I really think anyone who's experienced childhood trauma should do the same thing because you get some real quality counsellors rather than like your 10 free sessions where you've got to move on, which has been really, really good for me. And I've maintained a relationship with that therapist for years. And I think that's a really good thing for me. I can tell when I'm not feeling well and I go, I have to take that and address it.
How long have you done that for? When did you start and sort of like how long has that been a part of your life?
I think it's probably been about 5 years. that I've been going.
And I like to be as real as possible on these shows and just, to be open about my own life. And I always find that my inner dialogue says, how can someone fix my problems?
Yeah.
Do you know, because I've never known I've had a lot of this stuff come up. And this show's not about me, guys, so don't stress. But at the same time, so that if someone's out there listening and they think, well, how is anyone going to be able to help me deal with the stuff that I've gone through? And how's it going to change? Like, it took 36 years to get to this point. Where do you go to from there? Like, what does it start like for you?
I think it's very therapeutic to be able to tell a story and not have people silver lining you. So I think what has happened, that if I ever get in a stage where I'm like, oh, I'm going to talk about how I feel really sad today, people can get quite uncomfortable. And so then they often try to remind you what is good in your life. And it's a good intention to try and peck you up. Yeah. But sometimes you really just need someone to sit with you in that. And so I think for me, it was really therapeutic to tell the story and have someone that would just let me talk. Yeah. And she's not trying to redirect me. She's not trying to remind me to be thankful. She knows that when I come in a month or 2 weeks' time, I might not even want to talk about that again. It's done. Or I may readdress it in 6 months. But then reminding me that it was okay to be vulnerable, or giving me ideas about how to take care of myself a little bit better. It's been a really good experience. Yeah, because I'm drawing closer and closer and closer to moving through on some of the stuff that I feel, because it's only now as an adult, everything crushed me in my 30s. Like, I never felt, and it might be the fact that now I have a child as well. I think it brings up lots. Yeah.
And I don't even realize I connect the dots daily, right? Like, oh, hold on, that's something different. Yeah. And I think, I feel like I'm starting the journey so late. Like, I definitely should have sort of known about it, but I didn't know. Like, how do you fix things you don't know are wrong until you find that they're wrong? And anyway, just wanted to bring that up and just see where your point of view was from it, because you've done really well with that. And I'm yet to start that journey, so that's something I should probably think about. Anyone listening?
Absolutely.
Definitely start.
Yeah, definitely.
I also wanted to go through with your work, right? And I found this interesting because I feel like people who are really good at their jobs have always a really powerful motivator behind that. I feel the reason I'm good at creating communities is because I never had one. Yeah. Like, I've created a family at CrossFit HF. I've created a group of people, and I am so 100% in tune with every single person that I meet. Like, I want to be involved in every aspect of their life, style, and health. Yeah. And so I created that because I never felt like I had that as a child. So it's so easy for me to wake up in the morning and motivate myself to be involved in my members' lives. Yeah. Right. And like, do you need help? What do you need help with? I can try to help you with that. Do you need help on whatever it is? We've got a plan, or we can sort something out. Yep. Based on the upbringing. Going through what you've gone through and having the job that you have, do you think that makes you extra special at your job? Because you've got a lot of good, your coworkers sing your praises all the time. Like, we've talked a lot about some of the stuff that you've achieved and where you've gone. Do you want to run me through that now? So I've done 7 years as a caseworker, and I've moved around in different teams so that I get like exposure of all different aspects of that journey for little people. But I find that it helped me build relationships. Like, all of a sudden, this thing that was almost like a shame that I didn't want to talk about, when I did learn how to just name it appropriately, people admired it, and it became like a strength. So young people or kids I was working with, to be able to say, like, I get it to a degree because I was in care too, was like, oh, wow. And then I'd have these really beautiful, vulnerable conversations with kids where they're like, oh, did your mum used to show up for her visits? And I could say, oh, no, not all the time. And they're like, okay. And then they would give me all this stuff that they may not have shared if I didn't have that experience. Yeah. And I thought even for carers and parents who predominantly might not have been, like, they go through lots of different caseworkers and they have an experience of that. But then when I was like, oh, this is what drove me to do this job, they were like, oh, okay, she gets it to a degree. And I could say to people, like, I know what it's like to feel like you have to choose, or to tell people what you think they want to hear because you don't want to hurt their feelings. Like, people think that kids wouldn't do that, but they do. Like, absolutely, they want to impress everyone and they want to make everyone happy. It's just how they're wired. Yep. So I was like, no, I remember doing it myself at a really young age, and it was good. I got trained in therapeutic life story work because I went to a conference and saw this fabulous man speak. And he talked about how he had a care experience and that he didn't know enough of his story. And he talked about the importance of
naming the things that had happened, because if we are so afraid to have these conversations with kids about things that they had lived and experienced, what are we teaching them? We're almost reinforcing that shame.
Yeah.
But also preparing them for a dialogue that isn't just one story. Not just teaching people that what's in the files is 100% accurate, because it's not. Everything is reported information.
Yeah.
But preparing them that when they leave care, their family, their parents, whoever, may have a different version of that story. So I really, really enjoyed that. It was a 12-month degree and I learnt so much.
Yeah, it sounds amazing and interesting. Do you find that some of the stories that you have to deal with and the cases that you might get just set you back in any way, or they just stick with you and they just weigh on you like a ton of bricks and you're like, I couldn't do it?
Yeah.
I'd love to say that I was strong enough mentally, physically and emotionally to weather the burden of that, but I don't know that I could, because I would just be a mess. Like, how do you deal with knowing what they're going through, having that related experience, and knowing that there's nothing you can do right now, or you can't help, or the system's not wired to help them
in that. And there's different aspects to that, because I can go, oh, wow, this feels a bit close to home because there's similarities. So I have to be really careful to take care of myself in that. But also, like, they're the ones living it. So I need to make sure that I'm not taking the focus off them and making it about me. So in the moment, and my colleagues are really fabulous at this too, even without this experience. But lots of people have trauma and that's why they've ended up in these jobs, right? They just weren't removed. But we've reflected on it at work a lot, and it's about being able to say, when it's go time, we can put our own stuff aside and just be there, because you know how much being a caring adult or a smiling face can mean to someone that day, and then unpack your own stuff later when it's appropriate, because it's not about us.
Yeah. When do you find the time to do that? You got 4 kids, no, 3 and Jamie, and then you've got, full-time work where you're doing 40 hours plus a week, right?
Yeah.
Time, like, I think, what do you do that helps you with that? What are some of the mechanisms that you use to help unpack and feel like you're in an environment that's safe again? And
really good colleagues, really good managers over the years. Even just being little Facebook chats and things like that, where we can just tell jokes or check in on each other, just about our own emotional well-being, has served really well. Lunchroom chats, like if people listen to us, they'd be a bit concerned. We share way too much information with each other about our personal lives. But then on top of that, like Jamie, he's so good. He knows where I'm up to every day with, things that I'm worried about, and he'll check in every afternoon. And if he needs to take me for coffee, he will. Or really good friends. And then CrossFit has been a big part of maintaining that for me. Over the last 2 years, is being able to come here, and I've definitely shared with you, some days I walked in, I'm like, I feel like I'm going to cry today, and you're like, that's okay, do what you got to do. But then by the end of the workout,
because
I'm
if
in
you
a
don't
fabulous
cry,
mood.
the workout will make you cry anyway. So And that's one thing I did notice, and when I read that, because we wrote the show notes as well, when you mentioned CrossFit was a place that helps you gather your thoughts and feelings and helps you become centered again, I remember going, oh wow, like I didn't realize until I read that you wrote that I do that a lot. Like I will be on the verge of, like, I'm like, why do a set of burpees make me want to cry?
Yeah.
Like, why does a set of clean and jerks with a dumbbell press make me want to cry?
Yeah.
And it was moving the emotion that I'd trapped in my body out.
Yeah.
I was literally moving it through physically, and then I was feeling it emotionally.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, these squats, I'm like moving my stomach, and there's this tension in there from the anxiety I've held on to for days, if not weeks and months. And now I'm doing a whole bunch of sit-ups and squats, and I'm like, I can feel it. Like, it's a real thing.
Absolutely. I mean, I hate reading, but I did do it at uni. And there was a book called The Body Keeps Score.
Oh, yeah, I've read that book.
And so it was like we're storing this trauma, right? And we get good at pushing it down, and then it comes out when it's not expected. They talk about there's a high percentage of people that have, like, ongoing chronic health issues that have experienced trauma, but especially gut issues. Yeah. And I was like, oh, I've had gut issues for the last 10 years. I've seen a number of doctors. I've had scans. They rule it down to IBS. But I'm like, oh, I carry a lot of my anxiety in my stomach. That's probably a big driver for that.
Yep. I think that's all you had. I'm like, literally it is. So now help me. Like, I need help now. Like, I know what you're saying, and I need more help. And my IBS issues, which is what's been given, it's like, well, 90% of it is the way I can relate straight back to being a child. Like, traumatic events around bathrooms, traumatic events around waking up in the morning, my morning routine.
Yeah.
I have like this issue, and it's embarrassing, but it's one of those things where I need to go to the bathroom before I go anywhere all the time.
Yeah.
All of the time. even when I get somewhere, I need to know that there's a safe place to use the bathroom, because I feel like when I was a child, that was a huge thing. In the morning, the alarm would wake off. My mum would be in the shower. If I was in there, I'd get in trouble for being in the shower because they wanted to use the shower. And there was no, I didn't have my own space and no control. It's like, that's our space, get out.
Yeah.
And now when I wake up in the morning and go, everyone's going to wake up, they're going to need their space.
Yeah.
And I get out of that space. Oh, the trauma. And it's like, no, it's not IBS. It's like, it's anxiety that I do. That I wake up. The only time I don't feel is when I wake up at like 3 or 4 in the morning. And then I know that there's 4 hours before anybody else wakes up.
You're like,
so
yay, toilet time.
I've got 4 hours to enjoy my space, and then I give it over to, like, it's just me giving, in my mind, giving over to my mum again, giving over to my dad again. Like, that's their space now.
Yeah.
And like, that's the stuff that we need to get to the root of. I don't know how I got to that point. How did I get to that point? Interesting. So with your work and everything that you're looking for with that, where to next for you? Like, where from here? Where do you want to go with it all? Is there something that you would like to see yourself achieve in the next 5 to 10 years with work?
I actually recently got accepted to go into a new position, which starts in July. I'm very excited. So it's like a consultancy role. So then you help lead practice and relationship building with everybody, which I've always been pretty fabulous at. So I'm glad to give that a try. It's meant to be like a secondment, so 12 months, but I love to learn, and I especially love to learn strategies around helping people get through things. And that's a space where I'll not only get to learn lots, but pass it on to others. So yeah, watch this space. Super excited.
Now, has there been something that's like just stuck with you your entire career? Is there something that you've gone, I can't get past that? Has there anything that's been there so strong and dominant in your days that you're like, I actually might need to not do what I do anymore?
I think I go through ebbs and flows. Like you get to a point where you just feel exhausted, and my colleagues go through the same thing, because it is like you're responding in crisis all the time, or you're around the heavy stuff all the time, and that's a lot to maintain. And especially if there's anything happening at home, it's really hard to then balance that. Especially when Gray was sick, like it was like, how do I keep both of these things running?
Compartmentalize this whole trauma happening in every way you turn. Like
there was no escape. But I think I've always I remind myself that I've been there before. Even when I've gone through lots of like grief and loss, I kind of go, you've been here before. It's felt really awful before. Like you've thought you couldn't go on before, but you're okay. Like you put one foot in front of the other and you get it done. And that's the same with work. I think every now and then I've been really worried. Is it too much? Am I going to be able to keep going? But then I just kind of write it out, or I start, all right, I have to be a bit more mindful about finishing a bit earlier, don't stay at work too long, or catch up with people, or go to counselling, or
make time for the gym, make time for yourself.
Yeah.
Oh, so having that space for yourself to relax, and do you keep a routine that you stick to daily? Like we talk a lot on these episodes. I speak with people. What does a daily routine look like for you, Kas? Like from the time you wake up, where's your mind? Obviously, you have to balance out 3 kids, a husband, yourself, and then getting to work. What does your daily routine look like? And it can be different. Like every day, I think I have a Monday to Friday routine, or a Monday to Wednesday routine, and a Wednesday to Friday routine, and then a Friday to Sunday routine. Yeah, so slightly different.
I think always up by about 6:30. I like to get up before everybody else and pot around and do things, wake everyone up. We prepare everything the night before, because we have a house full of ADHD people, so mornings are not our friends without medication on board.
Yep. Like structure at the night so that we can relax a little bit more in the morning.
Yeah, I'm very structured, so I can manage it all. But yeah, I get up, wake everyone else up, sort of, help with breakfast. They've already got their clothes out the night before. Obviously, as the boys get older, that changes, because we've got different schools now, like high school and primary school. Get everyone off. I like to get to work early, because I like to read my emails and plan my day without distractions. So I'm always like one of the first people in my team in, because I want to be able to sort through without anyone around.
Again, the gift of anxiety too.
Yes, I have time anxiety so bad. If you are on time, you are late.
Which 20 minutes early, or you're
Jamie is not on board with that plan, and we are late everywhere, so I'm anxious. But yeah, I think you want to be at least 20 minutes early to everything. And it's like, I like everything to be really tidy in the morning, so I clean before I leave the house, which in school holidays feels like a complete waste of time, because by the time I get home, it's chaos again.
I didn't do anything this morning, apparently.
That's right. But it's like you were saying, when you can link it back, I read my files and see that there was lots of anxiety for me around mess because I would get
Trouble.
in lots of big trouble for that. So then after I read that, I was like, oh, that makes sense. That's why I'm like so hyper vigilant about mess. Like I would freak out if the kids would spill things when they were little.
Yeah.
And my initial response was to feel anxiety. But then Jamie would be next to me going, oh, well, clean it up.
Yeah, it's
No
just
big
spilt
deal.
milk.
Just it's just a mistake. Or he's in the bathroom encouraging them to like make a tidal wave, and I'm like listening to the water hit the floor, but I was guided by him to go, oh, I don't have to feel anxious. It's okay if they make a mistake and they spill something. It's not a big deal. And then they started to mirror that too, that they would spill something, and before I would even speak, even without Jamie there, the boys had learnt that, and they'd go, no big deal, I'll clean it up. And you're like, yeah, no big deal.
Yeah, yeah. And that's funny. Well, did you remember your mum being hyper, like a clean freak in a way?
No, but
But you just get in a lot of trouble.
I think that
Like mum was the cleanest individual on the planet. Like she would have the house, like she would gumption the sink. Like the sink, I could eat out of our sink. That's how, most times, especially for certain parts. This is all like different moments. Like as I got older, it probably got less and less like that. But when I was a child, I remember always vacuuming. And I'm like, if I sat still, I feel like now when Chloe vacuums the house, triggers again. Like,
yeah.
she's going to yell at me for something. I'm like, she's not your mum. She's not going to yell at you. Like,
Yeah.
what are you doing? Relax. Or if I... Way better now, but so if I was to spill something, I'm like, oh, I've got to get the vacuum out, clean this, mop this. Like,
Yeah.
it's incredible how there's things you hang on to.
Yeah.
So you clean up, you get the house clean before you leave, and then you head out to work, get your emails sorted so that you have the time to create your day, which is take-home message, guys. If you're not creating the day is filling itself anyway with shit you don't need.
Yeah.
So fill it with shit you need to do.
Yep.
And then from there, what does your routine look like?
I always make sure I have a lunch break, which most of my office are really good at, and I make a rule not to eat at my desk. Connection is key, right? Especially if we're going to maintain jobs like this or anyone in a stressful space, you have to take time for you. There'll always be work to do. So I'm like, I need to take at least this, minimum 40 minutes. I get an hour for lunch. I'm going to go sit with people and let them fill my bucket a little bit. We're going to laugh. We're going to joke. We're going to eat really yummy food.
Yeah.
And then go back to work and get through the next 5 hours of the day.
Yeah. So it's good rather than feeling like pressured to get everything done before lunch and then whatever's left over just cram in.
Obviously, crisis work I don't always but predominantly we all try to make a rule.
No.
Don't
We're
book
eating
each
lunch
other
right
in.
now. Please wait.
Yes.
Tell that crisis to hold on a little bit. No.
Yeah, no.
And then when you leave work, where's your routine take you?
Sports. We have 3 boys in sports, and if it's not that, then it's CrossFit, and Jamie has soccer. So I think nearly 4 out of the 5 afternoons we're getting along to sport. So,
which is very good. But if you keep your kids healthy and fit, that is, I think, the trick to keeping kids in a much more pleasant mental state and physical state for their whole lives.
Yeah. So we've got volleyball and soccer and basketball, and Jamie's got soccer, and then I've got CrossFit. And yeah.
Beautiful. Now, I remember writing to you about books and stuff, and you said you were jealous of people that could read books. Is that what? Is that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So do you're not a big reader, or just can't concentrate?
I can't concentrate.
Yeah.
Like it's really weird. I think my go-to is like, especially if I had a hard day, I come home and I play Candy Crush, and my kids joke because I'm on like level 1,000 and something. I don't know.
That's committed.
Because it's like I don't have to think. It's not. Sometimes social media is a bit negative. I just don't have the space for it. So it's like if I can just play Candy Crush, I don't have to do anything. Or I'm a big fan of rewatching what I've already watched because it's predictable. Yeah. And then I saw on TV once that's like an anxiety trait that people rewatch things. So I'm like, oops.
I could watch the same movie every day if I needed to, and then the same series. And there was a series I used to watch a show called Seventh Heaven. Have you ever seen that before?
Oh my God, yes.
You remember that? So... And this is the funny thing is I would take days off school to watch it at midday. It was midday. And so like my mom, I would just make up some lie about how I wasn't feeling well. And I'd get to stay home because I was so like that family made me feel so safe watching like the mum and dad and the kids. And I was like I would just like for the hour or whatever a show length it went for, I was like, why am I like this? Like no one that I know as a 12-year-old wants to watch Seventh Heaven. And even then it's like, I'm so in love with the family. Like, I'm like, I want to be a part of this family. I need to somehow find a really similar family to move in with. And I think I found the equivalent later on in life. But it was hilarious. I used to get so wound up in that and so predictable that the family's going to be accepting of the problems that come up in the family.
Yeah. Well, got to do what you got to do.
Oh, it was hairy. And then what was the other show? How I Met Your Mother. That was another one I used to like, just like a friendship circle. And like, isn't that
I like New Girl. I watch that a lot.
I haven't even seen that.
That's good.
I shouldn't get started.
And Scrubs.
Scrubs.
I could rewatch
Massive
that.
Scrubs fan.
Yeah.
Huge. Moving forward, do you have any gadgets and things you use? Like, so gadgets being, I ask everyone this sort of question. It's going to cut out in a sec. The question about what improves your quality of life around you. For me, it's, simple stuff like apps on my phone, or do you have anything that you use frequently as a day? Candy Crush being one of them, to help you manage and mitigate some of the stress that might be happening in the day. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with the peeps?
Can we do a shout out to the robot vacuum who makes my life easier?
Yes, you can.
Vacuums my floor.
That is a gadget.
One less thing. No, not necessarily. I think, our phones become the biggest gadget that we have around us all the time, and it's like the one-stop shop, because it's like, takes our photos and our calendar, and I really enjoy that because, again, I like to be really organised, so everything's on the iPhone calendar, and I've always been really sentimental with photos, so I have all that. I'm the person that takes all the photos and I have them sorted, and and wanting connection, because I've got people all over Australia, and my siblings are all over the place. So I think being able to message, I'm more of a could this be a text message person than a phone call. I will watch my phone ring and then message you and go, hey, is everything okay? Because I can't talk anymore today. Do
you ever get, and this is something I just want to know from you, as soon as I say hello on the phone, expect bad news. Like, no matter who calls me.
During the day, if I'm at work and someone in my family calls, I'm like, oh my God,
what's
he
wrong?
died.
What's happening?
And then
Where do I
like,
need to go?
it's okay.
Just think how you are. I'm like, why? No one ever cares about, no one cares about how my day is.
Write that in a message.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm the exact same. Every phone call I get, I'm like, this is bad news. Here we go. And I'll answer it with this chronic feeling in my stomach. It's like, oh, how you going? Terrible now because you called me. Why'd you call me? You shouldn't have called me. Just write me a message.
No. I did want to get better at books, but audio books, because one of my best friends, she swears by it.
That's funny because I find, I've got an Audible subscription and I can read with more concentration than I can listen because my hands are too free. So I can pick things up and my phone up and I can scroll through.
And then you'll realize you're not.
And I'm not even listening anymore. But if I've got a book, I'm like, okay, my hands are holding, my eyes are glued and fixed, and my mouth is shut, so therefore I don't get distracted. But I don't read as much as I should. I listen. I've got time. I'm not time poor. I'm just ruining my time structure. But I listen to audiobooks in the car, right? So more time there. And you find audiobooks more. I
haven't tried it yet, so it's constantly on my to-do list, and I'm either going to find a book that's going to entice me enough. Yes. Yeah. But I'm like, when I want to go to the bookshop and find a book that's the one, I'm going to sit down and read that. But I find I often read, I buy them and then I don't read them.
Yeah, but you're a book collector.
I am.
Yeah, I used to do that. But then I at some point get a chance to, which is on holidays once a month. Once a decade. So moving forward, so we're not going to make you feel bad about not reading the books that you haven't read yet still, Kas. So make sure you write a list this year and we get through those books. Mm-hmm. What would be your message to the world? If you could, for 1 second, just stop everyone in their tracks, everyone stops and goes, wow, did you hear that?
Yeah.
And it was a message from you to the minds of everyone. Let's do this twofold, right? Let's do this to little people because, you work with them. Let's do it to them. Yeah. And then let's do it to the adults. So you get two. No, most people don't get two messages, Kas. So this is special.
Two. For little people, I think it's remembering things like stars can't shine without darkness, right? So it's being able to understand that despite all of these things that have happened to you, you can go on and do great things. I used to have that stuck on my wall at my desk because it was always feeling this heavy feeling about all these things that had happened. Yeah. And then even at uni, reading that kids that have had these experiences are more likely to go on and hurt their kids or, are going to have less positive outcomes. And you're like, oh, that's deep.
Heavy. Yeah.
And so it can be easy to conform with that. It's too hard, but
almost gives you a pass sometimes though, doesn't it? I think when we sort of regurgitate and recite that rather than changing the information a little bit, although it's not real, but I think because statistically speaking, you're right. But I think then some people go, well, everyone said that I was going to go on and do this. So what else would I live up to?
Yeah.
Whereas when you change the message that's out there with what you're saying, it can change the thoughts of someone.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think
I like that one as well. That's similar to that is that the darkest part of the night is right before dawn or something like that as a quote around that. And I'm like, wow, because it's so true. Right before any breakthrough, you feel the most defeated. Like breakthrough mentally, physically, emotionally, whatever it is, whatever area of life, right before that major breakthrough is the feeling of absolute, what's the point?
Yeah.
I feel the darkest I've ever felt, but that's right in the middle of right before the breakthrough. It's like on the other side of this darkness, there is a massive breakthrough for you, but you cannot give in to the darkness now.
Yeah, it can be hard in the moment. But
100%. But I think when you start to say it over and over again, it becomes that sort of psychology for people like, oh, I know where I'm at. Because you feel lost in that darkness. Like, I'm like, I've lived in there. You
feel alone in it too.
You're like,
hard to think.
I'm lost. I'm alone. I'm by myself. Like, I don't know I don't know that there's going to be light, but there is because it's on the other side of this.
Yes. I think I've also talked to lots of little people about how it's okay to have boundaries. And I would say that to adults as well. Like,
we take them away from kids.
Yeah.
We tell them what their boundaries are. And I find to repeat myself. I find that I'm always pulling myself up saying, trying to control Quinn's behavior. I'm like, she's allowed to behave however she wants in this moment. This is her. Yeah. These are her emotions. She's allowed to react that way, but I can ask her. Yeah. And it's very difficult being raised in a family where you were told how to act.
Yeah.
You act like that again in public and I will beat the shit out of you. You're like, whoa. Like, okay, I won't act like that ever again, even though I feel unsafe. Like, even though I feel frustrated, even though I'm scared, even though I'm excited, I won't act any way that you don't want me to.
Yeah. I think it's even the boundary around if somebody's not making you feel safe, it's okay to separate a little bit and back away.
Yeah. And to the adults, what's your message to the world, to the adults listening? Join CrossFit. No, joking.
Join CrossFit. I think share the journey. I know that we all sometimes feel a bit ashamed or it's a really vulnerable place to talk about your story because as soon as you put it out there, you're opening yourself up for people to say things back to you that maybe aren't going to be helpful. But if you don't try to at least have that conversation, then it just keeps carrying, like you just feel so heavy.
Yeah.
And you may get a crappy reaction, but you'll get better at telling that story. The more times you tell it, like the easier it hopefully will start to feel all the gems that you might get back from people that helps you heal.
That's a great message. And that's why I'm glad you're here today sharing your story and we get to share our story together because I've always felt comfortable talking to you about things that I've experienced in my life. I don't feel uncomfortable talking to other people, but I know that from your mind and from where you're listening, it's a different place sometimes, you know? And I think that's a really good thing to share with others. And then when you can connect and you go, well, there's nothing wrong with Kas, there's nothing wrong with Shane, there's nothing wrong with us, there's nothing wrong with John, Sand, there's nothing wrong because we always felt like there might have been.
Yeah.
And
I think it's fabulous to see other people achieve, right? Or you can kind of, like I said earlier, it's almost like you want to talk about trauma and then make some jokes. Haha, trauma. But to see other people who can actively talk about how they think about things before they're parenting or before they're, talking in a relationship or whatever else, they're really brave conversations to have because then all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, me too. Like it's not just me overthinking every little aspect. Somebody else is doing that. And it's good to feel like you fit somewhere or that you're similar to someone else when you kind of grow up and get in this mentality that you don't fit or you aren't like someone else.
Yeah. And you can feel so disconnected because you're like, hold on, no one that I was directly related to at the time or really knew about was feeling or experiencing some of the stuff that was happening. So then you can go, hold on.
Yeah, absolutely.
That sigh that I make there it's not a put on sigh. It's an actual physical, emotional feeling that I feel in the moment right now. Like it's not what it was.
No, that's right. Safe now. We're okay.
Yeah. Which is hard to do, but very possible. And I want to thank you so much for sharing your story. Without you doing that, so many of us wouldn't be able to keep moving through. We wouldn't feel connected. We wouldn't feel part of something bigger and know that there is stuff out there that we can work through and stuff that we can push forward with. So thanks so much, Kas.
Very welcome.
Hope you enjoyed. Did you enjoy it?
Yeah. It wasn't as scary as I thought.
Yeah, I know. And they're like, well, can we do another one? Yes, we can. You think of another one, we can do another one too. But those of you listening out there, guys, if you want to reach out to Kas, I'm sure she wouldn't be opposed to it. Where could they reach you?
they could reach me on Facebook
Yeah.
or at CrossFit.
Nowhere.
They'll have to join CrossFit so they can
Yeah,
talk to me.
that's part of it.
6:30 p.m. represent.
Yeah, that's right. Got to fill out that class. You're like, I should never have said anything. Now there's like 55 people here just talking to me every workout.
Yep.
But yeah, I'm sure if you want to reach out to Cass, you know, you can go through me if you don't want to directly reach out, and I can put you into contact with her. But until next time, guys, keep having fun, and I will see you in the gym.